All right, thanks for, hopefully the fire hose is going down well as we blast you with things that have taken us, me, Jason, Dr. King, decades to learn. So I know it's a lot. I know it's a lot of it gets lost. That's why the resources are there. I'm actually going to slow it down, hopefully. I'm going to back up, and I'm going to go back into, as Captain Drew knows, instructor mode. So I taught at West Point, and I taught strategy in the Defense and Strategic Studies program. And there's always this thing at West Point, but it was when I was a Ranger instructor in Ranger School and an infantry mortar leader course about learning sciences and how people learn. And no, we need to get them to just give them a problem and they'll solve it that way. And most academic institutions are going in that direction of giving them problems so they can do a higher level of learning and not rote memorization. But I actually rebel against that. Next slide. The learning science is actually pretty solid on how people learn new information and then are able to apply it. Bloom's taxonomy is pretty straightforward. Nobody really argues against it. You actually do start at the bottom of the taxonomy and work your way up to analysis and synthesis and do what we're going to ask you guys to do as planners. Like, hey, I'm going to give you Manila and I want you to accomplish this mission. A very high level, but I haven't given you anything actually as the foundation of what you've learned in urban warfare, right? This is another hidden skeleton in the military closet, is that there's a lot of assuming of what we all know. And since I'm now out, I can say, no, that person's, not imposter syndrome, but that leader when in charge, take charge. Or that planner, that S3, that XO, he's very uncomfortable. He had never gotten a mission like that before. Or if he does, he gets it once a year, every 2 years at some big combat training center. So attack the city. And then, okay, we're all going to plan like we know what we're doing. We don't. And that's fine. But I bet everybody in this room can tell me what the 5 major terrain features are, the 3 minor terrain features are. You could all tell me what OACOC means. You can tell me what MTC, METTC means, A-scope, permissive PT. It's the military way. We make you remember stuff to help your mental model and help you problem solve, right? In any urban operation is going to be a problem, but what's your foundation? I put this together, and General Woods wouldn't let me make it I would test everybody in this class. Since this isn't a seminar. There's actually a few seminars on urban warfare around the world. That's why I'm very specific on when I say the world's only this, this, and this. This is a course with a enabling learning objective and a terminal learning objective of when you're done, every person in here should be better at planning and executing large-scale combat operations against urban terrain. That's measurable. And that's why I wanted to give written tests to say, okay, I'm going to test you on what you do or don't know. Because a seminar wouldn't do that. It's about familiarization. It's about better understanding. Like, no, I actually want you to learn something in this course. So next slide. You can go to the doctrine, and a lot of the stuff that we as a military say that you should know is in our doctrine, right? Everybody's supposed to read the doctrine. They know it. They can apply it. There's another skeleton in that closet. You're not going to open that book unless you're required to solve a problem. And there is not a foundation, that doesn't make any sense, a foundation of urban specific knowledge in our military. Next slide. So Jason or Major Drew quoted Colonel Ralph Peaver, who wrote a couple articles about urban warfare, that when you talk to somebody, and I believe it's true, about urban warfare, they think about buildings. My spin on that, and Jason was the same, that we now think about close quarters battle. We think about the close fight. We think about fights inside rooms and fight buildings. I don't anymore, but I did. Next slide. So let's start with Urban 101. What would I expect somebody who's been through an urban course to be able to say they know? And I actually mean memorize, because that's the foundation of Bloom's taxonomy. You start with what you know, and then that's what you use to do analysis and synthesis and application. So one is a definition of urban environments. What is urban, according to the US military? It's in our doctrine. But if I would have pre-tested everybody in here and I said, okay, define urban, I don't know if everybody could have answered that question. The US doctrine says it's right here. It's in the manual. I would expect at the end of the course, you guys could say urban is defined as, which actually is interesting that other populations don't, like the greater world defines urban as everything that's not rural. That's their definition. I commend our militaries for having definitions. So it's, it's complex man-made terrain. It's a population and the infrastructure to support it. And I think I made that before. We'll go through this course, and it's going to take a while. I don't even know if I'll break you that most people in this room just think about the man-made terrain features, the city. And when I say the city, you still think man-made, you think buildings, not populations and the infrastructure to support them. Now, that's called the urban triad. It's in the doctrine. I 100% agree with it. I think everybody should know it. There's another one that's in the gray book, because other people, and I agree with this, that there is a fourth aspect to the definition of urban that distinguishes it differently than the rural. Because in accordance with like the world, there's only urban and then there's rural. In urban, you have the urban triad plus the information systems that link people to each other and to the world. My next block of instruction, I'm going to try to apply everything that we talked about thus into a single case and see if you can see these things. One of those being the definition of urban. The other aspect is urban operations, the definitions. Define urban operations would be another thing that I would want a student of urban warfare to be able to do. If you're a doctrine guy, which is an amazing class, that the US military no longer uses MOUNT, military operations on urban terrain. It's actually, because we do this, like, okay, that word doesn't exist anymore. Like, what do you mean it doesn't exist anymore? Like, no, we supersede it. Like, it doesn't exist. We don't have MOUNT anymore, according to our doctrine. We have urban operations, because it's supposed to account for the civilians, because MOUNT was literally just buildings. Urban operations is, as defined here, when the man-made construction and the density of the population are the prominent features. So when you say, I'm preparing myself for urban operations, there's a clear definition for urban, and there's a clear definition for urban operation. And I would expect students of urban warfare to know that. Next slide. All right, so there's a whole bunch of other stuff in there, like the fact that every private in the US military will know how to read a map and the major terrain features and the minor terrain features, but they don't learn anything about urban in it, because all those things aren't in urban. But urban has all this information. We just don't know it. So like the 4 major urban patterns, and we're going to cover a lot of this in the overflight, but hopefully it's not a surprise to you guys that this stuff is in our doctrine, and it's probably not in a foundational, as in if I asked any soldier in the US military, he would be able to say, yeah, there's all kinds of different city patterns. You can have a satellite, you can have a segment, a linear, a network, and the so what of that? Well, that means you'll have those small separated urban areas that are separated in terrain, but they feed into the big. Next slide. Well, one of the reasons it matters is that we, again, in our application of our warfighting concept and our plans, it's in our doctrine. It's how to think about a city and understanding the city you actually are in. So this is a pretty famous battle map that was taken from Zakawi, one of the main threats of the AQI in Iraq, the threat that was really breaking down the US military strategy in Iraq, that was captured around the surge 2008. This is basically pocket litter from Zakawi with a map of Baghdad showing that Baghdad is a segment that's fed by other areas. And that was the enemy's strategy, was using the Baghdad system against itself. They didn't have to attack Baghdad. They attacked the things that support Baghdad. And it's almost like Mosul and ISIS never had to attack Baghdad. They had to attack what supports Baghdad. That's understanding urban operations, understanding urban warfare. And after this map was found, General Petraeus changed the strategy of the U.S. military in the Baghdad security plan and how forces were assigned to the city. If you understand how the city works, or understand even how a city can be laid out, that it can be fed by other areas that are more important than controlling the center of the city. Next slide. Similar to Kyiv, but I'll talk about that in my next presentation. Kyiv is a satellite city with multiple cities that surround it that are a big part of whatever it is, the center of gravity for your operation. But understanding that when you go into an urban area, it can be make or break a plan if you don't understand that and you're just fixated on a single piece of key terrain or something. So understanding the major patterns of urban areas, I think, is as important as understanding the 5 major terrain features. I honestly do. Next slide. But okay, let's say you understood that. Then each city, you can identify areas of the city that are predominant in almost every city just on the fact that a civilization popped up on that city, modern evolution of industrial cities, everything, that there are 5 urban functional areas. And again, we'll talk about this in the overflight, that any soldier could probably pick out in any city. It's like a core piece of information. Next slide. So you have the core and the periphery, and I made an acronym for each one of these because if I was, again, Secretary of Defense, Chief of Staff of the Army, I would start in basic training, indoctrinating soldiers in urban warfare by having them memorize the key components of Urban 101. So I made an acronym for each one of the functional areas. But there's a core, there's a residential area, there's an industrial area, there's military areas, and then there's outlying high-rise areas. In each one of these, in the gray book, we're trying to put a so what, because General Warwick wouldn't let me just put in there the acronyms and just memorize this stuff. You got to put in the so what for commanders and planners. One example is the so what to industrial areas is if you are a student of urban warfare, you'll just continue to read how these massive, tough battles happen in industrial areas, because that's usually where your strong buildings are. It's also where there's a greater line of sight for weapons to actually aim at each other. So in Ukraine, in Iraq, in Syria, there are big fights in industrial areas of cities. But that's because most cities have industrial areas. Stalingrad, industrial area. I mean, literally, it's all of them. But I'm sure if I was to put this on this, we don't even think about, if I give you a map of Manila, you'll start doing our military things, like going through METC, and if the intel guys are really good, they're going through this and this. The fact that it has these 5 functional areas might not come up, and that the industrial area may be a key piece of terrain, because it's where battles happen for a bunch of reasons. Next slide. Oh, no, sorry, back. So, again, I'm the urban geek. So there's some things that I think that aren't even in our own doctrine if we knew this stuff in Urban 101. One of those is waterways. And I just did a podcast, if you listen to it, about the top 10 things we need or don't need to train for urban warfare. One of the things that we need in our urban warfare training sites, again, we don't need mock mega cities, is waterways. Because I just can't find a city that doesn't have a major waterway running through it. And Ukraine is a great example, and everybody uses it as their examples now, and I will too, that any of the urban battles, those waterways are big for military challenges, wet gap crossings. They're just huge. But if you understood cities, that you're not going to find a city without those obstacles, that water obstacle, and that really becomes a battle for those obstacles more than it does some other things that we think about. So if your training areas, as you'll notice, we'll go to NTC. Do you think there's a major water obstacle out in the desert? No. But I also say you don't need that, because if you go to the Marine Corps Range 220, they have a giant ditch that runs through their urban area, which simulates the challenge of the waterway that's in every city that I have ever been to in the world, because that's the way cities work. And then if you're more geeky too, as you heard Major Drew talk about the west side of cities, For some reason, the west sides of cities is what starts in the city, and then they bridge out to the east side across that river. Just on the evolution of the city, because most cities are really old, the population on how they started themselves on one side of the city, and as they grew out, and they're on the other side of the river. But by form and function of the way the city developed, as you're doing your intelligence preparation of the operating environment beforehand, it won't be, it never city specific, but I get into like how the city was built from the beginning and how it grew out, and that'll determine the type of buildings it is. It'll determine where the industrial zone was put. All these things because of the form and function of the city's development in that geographic location. Next slide. So there are urban infrastructure. So again, heuristics of our military is that infrastructure, yeah, you kind of talk about that in stability operations, right? No. Every city of the world has infrastructure by definition. Again, we're going to agree on the definition of urban, and we're going to agree on the definition of urban operations. We better start talking about infrastructure. But if I was to just test you before you walked in this door and go, okay, what's the infrastructure of an urban area? You might get a few, but do we actually know and then can categorize? Does permissive PT cover infrastructure? It covers some aspects of infrastructure, but it's not urban specific because permissive PT is for any operating environment in the world. But there are actually 6 categories of urban infrastructure. And I tried to create an acronym that would stick, but economics, administration, transportation hubs, the communication infrastructure, energy, and cultural. And in the gray book, like I think I mentioned it, doctrine's great. And if it's a break in case of war, great. The intelligence community decided to take the intelligence preparation for urban operations and delete the manual. Supposedly they incorporated it into the new intelligence operation manual, but they didn't. But in there is just amazing, like Jason was saying, crosswalks of things you think about in urban operations for intelligence, just checklists of, did you think about this, this, and this, and this? And it has in there about infrastructure because those who control the water, the transportation, and the communication control the city. If you are thinking about the infrastructure of the city. And by control, and again, I hate that because you guys know I hate that about controlling the city. But there is a concept of city as a system and all this, but you have to understand infrastructure. So this is a mental model which would help problem solve if we applied it frequently to where it was just as much as I can rattle off everything else that we memorize in the military, we don't memorize or familiarize ourselves even with the infrastructure of an urban area. Next slide. Again, I'm really giving you this so that when we do the overflight, we're going to say, okay, we're going to fly over Los Angeles, and we're going to go through these military urban 101 things to see if you can identify them, and then hopefully talk to the so what's of, okay, what can we identify the major infrastructure aspects of Los Angeles, the port, the highways, the locks, all that stuff that wouldn't be very important no matter the military operation. But we are, the other assumption is enemy focused, right? Where's the enemy? Well, that's important as much so in IPB as what are the effects on the terrain as well as the infrastructure. So here's the stuff that we're actually more comfortable about with the physical aspects, right? So even if you only thought physical, do you think the 4 types, and the manual reads really weird on whether it's a type of urban physical characteristic, is it a layer, is it a domain? But we can all agree that there is 4 levels of an urban area. Next slide. You have airspace and the impact on friendly and enemy and on the civilians, and just the airspace over an urban area will be different than any other type of terrain. The changing in verticality of the actual, some cities have their own wind generation in them. That airspace, whatever asset is, it actually, or an urban terrain is different. We're all pretty good with surface right? So there's the surface, what we can see, what we can think about, the streets, the alleys. I don't need the slide, but so there's also subsurface, right? And we're going to talk about underground warfare. We're going to talk about cities underneath cities, whether that's present, but it's one of these 4 layers that we should all know. And the other one is supersurface. All right, so supersurface is almost not as kind of common sense, but it makes sense that there is this separate layer, right? That if you have the surface, the subsurface, and the airspace, we all kind of get those. Like we could all probably rattle those off easily. But the supersurface is another consideration for military operations, and I agree with. You have the rooftops, you have the interiors of certain buildings. That is a implication of the terrain. So just like we memorize MET-TC or OACOC more appropriately, OACOC, like this would be the OACOC of urban terrain to start off with, is that there are these 4 layers that we should all, it should be really drilled into the military from the beginning. Because each one of these you could break down how it impact, streets and roads and the waterways, all that's normally present. How would it impact a military operation from the lowest squad level up to the brigade and divisional operations we're talking about? But as we go through our drills of IPB and COA development, see if you can pull any of this stuff that I'm going to put in this presentation using our normal processes. Next slide. Did you know that there are 3 basic street patterns of most cities? And it usually goes to how the city was built and how the city was developed. I had the great pleasure, not so much, of fighting in the 2008 Battle of Sadr City. Sadr City is a 2 million person city within a city in Baghdad, but that was purpose built for the Shia population, is where Saddam wanted to put everybody. But it was purpose built, nice and neat in a grid pattern. It's pretty straightforward. I like this acronym because it's RIGS, right? Radial, irregular, and grid. Radials are more those European type of cities that start with a central area and then they radiate out, right? If you've ever traveled in Europe, you're kind of familiar with the radial system. Large avenues into them. And then if you're, again, a geek of urban warfare, there is a way to design your city for war. And the famous example is Paris, that redesigned after the war, one, to make the city itself less susceptible to revolution. So they made the streets bigger. They took the cobblestones and the bricks out of the streets so you couldn't pile them up and make barriers. But they also made some streets larger just to be able to get military forces rapidly through the city. So you can actually design a city for war, which is another fascinating part. Or you can just have a really jacked up street pattern like Boston, where one way is going one way. It's just crazy because of the way the city was developed over time. But if you're a military planner, that has to be like kind of like the 101, like this briefing is, of understanding the city or the segment of the city that we're in and the implications that's going to have on maneuver warfare. Because that's probably going to be easier to do maneuver warfare in a grid system than in a irregular street pattern, where the guy turns down a road and that road ends for some reason, which is like the 2004 Battle of Sadr City, where it was a grid, but when the enemy can rapidly place obstacles, and all of a sudden now whatever map you had, which is actually one of the biggest lessons from the Battle of Mogadishu, was that the city, there was no map or anything that let the forces know how to maneuver in the city. Because of the Civil War, 50,000 people moved to the city in a matter of weeks and redesigned the city street pattern overnight because they put up lean-tos all across the city. So it wasn't one that we didn't know how to move in Mogadishu. It was that the fact the city changed overnight to an irregular street pattern, and no map really got them to where they were doing. I didn't know about that until doing a panel with some of the veterans. Next slide. So let's review. I know that was, if I was to test you at the end of this course, this is what John Spencer would put on the test, on top of the practical exercises. But we would start with define urban operations. Can anybody remember in the short amount of time, what are the 4 main urban patterns or the way a city will be developed? Hopefully the acronym helps, right? Satellite, segment, linear. Network, right? And why that would matter. And we'll give a couple of examples, and there are a whole lot in Jason's presentations of that has a huge implication on large scale combat operations. It's how that city, what type of city the battle is happening in. Well, those functional areas, like I said, especially in Ukraine, whether it's Mariupol, Severodonetsk, Bakhmut, you're going to find a bad, lethal, costly battle happening in industrial areas, just by the nature of the physical terrain that's already there in an industrial area. Same thing with infrastructure. I'll show you some examples where we think about, some people think about urban infrastructure as kind of a stability operations consideration or a phase 4 thing. Where I can show you in high intensity warfare, a better understanding of the urban infrastructure actually is a great advantage to one side or the other. The layers, most people know, again, surface, subsurface, and airspace, but that super surface is something that I don't think that, especially S2s, don't factor into, because, and same thing with street patterns. We'll go to Rajesh. Again, why I love to spend so much time at Rajesh, because that's where the rubber meets the road. Like all the PME, all that doesn't, NTC is the test. You train for the test. So if I go into the talk and in the test, they have, 2-dimensional maps with no layers, because the city they're attacking is a purpose-built city that really doesn't have most of these. 100% every city of the world has these elements. So they don't get to that part of why does it matter for the operation? Well, we don't train that. So or what I get told from the S2 guys is that, if I had more time, I would do some of this stuff. Like line of sight, right? How far can I see from this to that point based on this urban layer that's in my way, or or underground, or when it usually gets way away. Next slide. So there are other urban kind of science stuff that geeky guys like me and Stu Lyle, if you sat through his briefing, kind of go through, because one of those is typology. I already covered some of this. And not all urban areas are the same. Not all urban areas, it would even be a challenge. And there's actually a definition and typology in our doctrine that says this is the type of urban area, what it's classified, and then some of the challenges, like the fact that we can't agree on a definition of a city. Why does that matter? Because that's usually a threshold of complexity, I think. In the size of the population, again, the size of the infrastructure that supports that and the complexity of that, its connectedness to the whole world. If you agree on that 4th variable, defining urban is the information space and the connections between the people that live there to themselves, to the bigger region, and to the world, then we should know some things about urban sciences and agree on what the challenge will be for the people we're planning for. So density, like I said, when we did the megacity, they said, that's a bad word. Don't ever say that word to me again, megacity. I just don't want to hear it. Let's talk dense urban areas. Okay, what's density mean? What's a dense urban area? How do we define density? Anybody know? Again, if you're a geeky academic, there are people who try to, but there's no agreed upon. One is, what is dense? Like, what's the threshold? We're starting to focus in, and they had it in a draft of the urban doctrine, but they took it out, that it's about 7,000 residents per square mile. That's when the density starts to increase. And it's just something I like to look at when we had this battle here, like in Los Angeles. Oh, what's the density? Well, it's about 2,000 people per square mile. Then people go to Manhattan, in New York City, go, yeah, but our density is 68,000 per square mile. But then there's a daytime population and there's a nighttime population. So is it dense if you take all the people out, is it still dense urban terrain? Yeah, by the physical aspects of it. So some people consider density the number of dwellings per hectare. Again, this is not that's why I broke off the review versus this is really good to know. But if I'm a military planner, I would want to show the density in an urban population. And by density, it is either the number of people that are present in that square mile or the number of structures are present there in that square mile. Because as we go lay a map of Manila out, it looks like it's all dense. It just does. Because our satellite imagery that shows urban areas like, dang, that's a lot of urban area. When we fly over Los Angeles, we're going to see that, again, if we know the functional areas, that in the residential area, we may or may not have density. But in that city core, we may have extreme density, both in physical and population and infrastructure. Next slide. So this is one as an infantryman I like to look at too, and it's deep buried in our doctrine. I actually have a dream as an urban warfare guy, and if you guys can help me out with this, is that in the 1970s, we used to do experiments with building material, and the Marines did it and the Army did it, saying given our different types of weapons against certain types of urban infrastructure or urban building materials, can we penetrate it? So you can watch this video of them shooting AK-47 at a wood wall, a reinforced concrete wall, and then what are the different numbers. So according to our doctrine, in order to penetrate an 8-inch reinforced concrete wall, you just fire 100 rounds of M240 at the building, and you'll penetrate it. But it should be on tripod because all the rounds have to land in the same spot. This gets you to firing 10 $1 million per round tow rounds at a building and not have any effects, because it's not ingrained in us to even think about what are the effects of our weapons on the building material of the city we're in. Of course, if the city is made up of glass, I can penetrate, but that also means anything that I drop is all gonna, that's a millions and millions of pieces of shrapnel that's gonna rip through anybody that's in that area. 50 rounds of 50 cal. The first time I fired an AT-4 in Iraq at a wall, we were all surprised that this big thing that we carried around didn't do anything to that wall. So I mean, it's a sabot round, so to put a little hole like this size into the wall we shot it at. I'm pretty big on concrete penetration. And the doctrine presentation stole my thunder, and I say this, I was on TV a little bit last year, and one of the things I said is that it's a lot easier to defend a destroyed city than it is a not destroyed city. That's historical. So the Luftwaffe of Stalingrad destroyed 80% of Stalingrad before the battle started, just bombing it. Hours and hours bombing it. And all they did was create, to quote General Townsend from the 2017 Battle of Mosul, is all we did was create a bomb-proof bunker for every person in there that wanted to defend from. Because a rubbled building is a lot more defendable than a not rubbled building. And this gets into, again, the geeky, almost engineering, is that if you blow off, if you put holes in every space that would have contained a concussion artillery, then it actually has less concussive power. So that's what happened in Stalingrad. They blew off all the roofs and they kept dropping munitions, and the effects of the weapons just had less. This should be, like I lived in Panama. I went to jungle warfare school. I could tell you what every type of plant to stay away from. I could tell you stuff to eat. I could tell you all that stuff about, I still have problems understanding load-bearing walls, looking at a building and seeing what it's made of, and the implications of the effects of my weapons and my forces against the urban terrain. That's played out in Ukraine in folds. And one of the biggest examples is in the most recent case in the Battle of Bakhmut. And like why, there's lots of political reasons, which is a great case study, but why on one side of the river, the fight went very fast. On the other side of the river, it didn't. Well, that's after my friend, who I hate him, and I said this on the podcast, very upset with him. I'm the urban guy. He's not. On his last trip, he went into Bakhmut, and on the east side of the river are all fairly new construction made of, not steel reinforced concrete with basements. So pretty rapidly, you can take that material. On the west side of Bakhmut is Soviet industrial apartment blocks of steel reinforced concrete, all with basements. I mean, I could teach a class on Urban 101 just using the Battle of Bakhmut, because this caused for a very protracted building by building fight just by what the actual city and how it was built. It's built on the on the high terrain because it was a fortress city. The city of Bakhmut, much like many of the cities in Ukraine, are ancient. And the reason they're there was to protect somebody's empire. They're all fortress cities, not all of them, but some of the ones that have been the most ugly fights is because their terrain still matters, even in urban areas. The layers matter, but the natural terrain that the city, like Los Angeles, was built on top of, as we look at Beverly Hills on our flight, and things like that, high ground is still high ground. Key terrain is still key terrain. Terrain matters. And I don't know, once we start assigning ourselves to look at urban warfare, again, when I lay out that two-dimensional map of Manila, it just all looks urban. Like it's just streets and buildings. No, terrain still matters. Next slide. So megacities, we covered it. It's the straight definition, a city of 10 million. There's only 33, and they're estimated to be 43. I wrote a paper on what's the most likely megacity in which an operation might happen in, and this is what other planners do. But the study that we did for a year basically said that, hey, the military is not prepared in any way, shape, or form to do an operation in there. We're going to cover a lot of that in the course we already have. But even in a megacity, this is my dream job now. I have a dream job now. During that 1 year, we went out to 5 different megacities, and every one of them was night and day different. But the kind of scary thing was about the way that the U.S. military interagency, intercity operation is that the people assigned. So this is talking about other organizations like Department of State, country teams, FAOs, foreign area officers, who are literally. We spend a lot of money developing experts in a country. So we went to all these mega cities, which are, many of them hold populations greater than most countries. Well, who's your Mumbai expert, your Dhaka expert, your Lagos expert? None of us are. What are you talking about? I understand the country. I've studied the country. We were amazed that even within a city, going back to who would you operate at the city level? Well, there's no representative on our side who understands that city, even though I understand the language, I understand the country, I understand its history. But cities that are the economic engines of nations, that are the seats of political power, we don't, as in the U.S. military and the U.S. government, invest in expertise in cities. And I actually got that from a combatant commander standing up in a conference saying, on urban warfare, saying, as a combatant commander, there was nobody I could turn to brief me on a city within the AOR. It's not the way we are built. For some reason, even though the world is more urban than it is rural, we resist for some reason. There are reasons, and I know some of those reasons, but in the mega cities report, we went to all these cities, Mexico City, like that. There are no experts on our side in that city. So how that city works, what are the requirements, what are the key terrain, who are the main power brokers, all this stuff. It's not there. Next slide. So smart cities. I have a paper and a podcast. I know enough about it. A lot of times it's something that pops up in the special operations community. Smart city, by definition, again, it would be in my doctrine, if I had doctrine, define a smart city. By definition, it's just a city where the technologies improve the quality of life. So think, traffic cameras that are respondent to flow, or sensors that the city puts in place and then they make changes They cut off streets, make them no longer pedestrian. That's a smart city. When the sensors of the city, to include water flows and all this, feed improvements in the civilization of that urban area. A lot of people talk about it's just EM and sensor management. As we talked about, as the world has changed, technology has changed, that you're not going to enter an urban area and not be under a sensor of some type. I'll show you a case study where we view that as a disadvantage, right? We want to control that. We want to turn that off. And the Russians had a lot of problem going into Ukraine, not being seen by highway road cameras. War crime tribunals are now using facial recognition from cameras to punish or to indict soldiers for war crimes because they were caught on cameras within the environment, and then facial recognition to help in that. And this is that, I don't know if anybody remembers this, this aspects to all these people that want to talk about how do you clear a skyscraper. Well, these guys thought they'd just take the elevator to the top, and the elevator operator who had sensors there just locked them in the elevator for I don't know how long, and locked the Russians in an elevator because, well, you're going to walk the stairs? You're going to take, oh, you're going to take the elevator? Okay. It's funny, but smart cities are a thing. Not every city, there's actually not a registry. The Chinese are actually leading the way on development of smart cities, but they don't share the information in that development. But it's about sensors. For me, so what for military planners is that I don't know of an urban area, again, in our mind that we have that, one, that there isn't a sensor, or two, is how we're going to use those sensors to our advantage, vice our disadvantage, in all the warfighting functions. Next slide. So these are, Major Drew covered a lot of these in historical case study. I can slow the briefing down as I went around talking to units, talking to science, like DARPA, people like that, developing technologies to support warfighter challenges. As I went to National Training Center and said, look, John, I believe everything you talk about. So what? What do you want me to do? Well, I want you to reflect the realism of the challenges that our soldiers are facing. So I have a whole presentation for this, but this is really quickly Urban 101 or Urban Warfare 101. What are the frequent, enduring, and modern challenges? The frequent and enduring challenge is strong points. A strong point, again, definitions matter, is a building, a reinforced building in which the defender has decided will be a place they will defend from. Maybe you make it a battle position. Maybe you make it a part of your greater area defense or perimeter defense. But strong points had fallen out of our doctrine. Matter of fact, so National Training Center, I gave them a big briefing on defending, like a 3-hour briefing. It was actually on December of 2022. Ironically, me and Major Drew wrote an article, which I think you guys should check out, which what are the enduring tactics of urban defenders that have worked? Strong point is overwhelmingly the number one thing. But when I took this to the National Training Center, like, but how do you build a strong point? We have in our doctrine, our old doctrine, how to reduce a strong point. You use good SOSRA, you use fires, you do all these things, and they're integrated those now, but there's actually no doctrine on picking the right building in which to make a strong point if you're the defender. Everybody, and I do as well, because again, I was on TV a little bit last year, and Pablo's house is one of the greatest enduring urban legends of a strong point, right? A single apartment building that one NCO, and depending on the time frame, and 20 soldiers held for over 80 days against a division of attackers. Mechanized division attacking a single building. They just picked the right building to strong point. That building had clear lines of sight from 3 directions. It had a basement. It was concrete reinforced steel. It had 2 levels, so they could fire on top of tanks from the upper levels when the tanks came in, and they could regress to the bottom levels when the airstrike started or the fires that they thought they would just reduce. And this is what you're seeing over and over again in Bakhmut. Why is Bakhmut taking 9 months? Well, it's because every building on the west side is a strong point that they're defending from. But if you look in those 2 manuals right now, find me where it says how to make a strong point. Or find me how it says how to reduce a strong point. Because as a planner, whether I'm defending or attacking, if I'm telling you that strong points are in a high intensity battle, if we imagine whatever battle we want, strong points are what just keep popping up. And they work really well if you know how to build them. You'll see at the National Training Center, they'll talk about, I was only allowed 3 things for them to change in the Army's biggest tactical urban warfare exercise. They said, just give me 3 things, John. Okay, strong points, as in teach the Black Horse how to make strong points, make the attacker deal with a strong point. Because you don't clear a strong point in seconds. You don't clear a strong point in days. Sometimes it takes weeks to clear a single strong point. So I said strong points. I said obstacles. Because you look at complex obstacles. And by obstacles, I don't mean the giant mind wire obstacle that we put around all of our training sites and make people do a combined arms breach of. By obstacles, I mean every street blocked, every alley blocked. The Battle of Seoul was called the Battle of Barriers because the minimally trained defenders picked right and just built barriers on every street. And that buys them time. And I'll show you in the Battle of Kyiv. If you can put a barrier in front of the military, it causes problems if they don't have mobility assets with them to clear barriers. And if they do, then that becomes a priority target. You take those out. For some reason, in our urban warfare training exercises, we have a giant barrier on the outside of the city, get into the city and start clearing. So they let me say barriers. And by barriers, I mean really big barriers. Yeah, buses. Again, the U.S. military thinks we can control the environment, and the U.S. military thinks we need to bring everything we need to fight into the environment. The urban terrain is not just a disadvantage, it's an advantage because there's lots of stuff in the urban environment I can use. Like buses and large construction vehicles and all that to block streets. But we are also the U.S. military. We have the greatest intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance assets of the world, right? I'll know where every obstacle is, right? And I'll plan a path through it, right? I'm not going to make the mistakes of Mogadishu. Like, I'm not going to have to fly above. I will have pre-planned all the stuff. So when I told National Training Center, well, history shows that rapidly in place obstacles are one of the biggest challenges for the U.S. military. 2004, Battle of Sadr City. There's no obstacles out when the platoon that launched into there, and the enemy just started throwing obstacles into the street, rapidly and placing them behind the forces that they passed through and trapped them inside there. So I said, rapidly in placed obstacles, stuff that you can move around quickly, but it's going to cause a problem. And then the third thing I said was snipers. Because again, if I understand the layers of urban terrain, one of the challenges is the three-dimensional 360-degree fight, the millions of vantage points. If I want to cause any military, it doesn't matter how good you are, I put out snipers. Because that will bring a unit to its halt. There's our reactive sniper drills are under-trained, under-resourced. I dealt with this even in a low-intensity battle of snipers shooting through the neck, shooting through the armpit, and like, what's the drill? Like, oh, pop smoke. And then now they have technologies that tell you where it came from and stuff. I guarantee most MTOs don't have those anymore. But in the urban terrain, that's a frequent, enduring challenge. Whether you watch Saving Private Ryan, whatever, that snipers, urban snipers, because it's going to be really hard to find them. And unlike the jungles of Vietnam, you can't just back up and then level that piece of ground where the sniper was believed to be, right? Because it's urban terrain. There are constraints on the use of force. Even if you had the capabilities to level something, you really don't. Ambushes, tunnels, and mouse holes. We'll talk about mouse holes. It's tactical, but it actually is a operations consideration. Is if you go to the Israel military, I spent a lot of time in Israel observing how the IDF fight. They have a very specific big D doctrine, the way they're going to fight. They know exactly what urban terrain they're going to fight in. There's nobody better at fighting in urban terrain than them. They have in their really nice urban warfare training center a hole in every exterior and interior wall of their urban training site. Hundreds of holes. Because they learned from their experiences that, and it's, again, be really careful what the data says, is that most casualties don't happen inside of clearing rooms. Most casualties of urban warfare happen in the streets and the alleyways. That makes sense, right? But Israelis really have a low tolerance to casualties. So after their experiences, they developed this concept called infestation, where they purposely try to go through buildings and never present themselves on the streets. But I told you there's a small D doctrine what's in those books, because you're not going to find anything about how to do mouse holing in there. The word's in there, but it won't tell you how to do it. Because logistically, how do you tell a maneuvering force that I don't want you on any of the streets, I want you to mouse hole through the, what kind of supplies do I need for that? What kind of time do I need for that? I have a really good photo of a second battle of Fallujah where the Marines are standing on a wall, just hitting it with a sledgehammer, trying, as they figured out this enduring lesson relearned that if you're on the streets or the alleys, you're going to die, to go through the building. So they're sitting there hammering away the sledgehammer at concrete walls, trying to create mouse holes. But the Israelis put them out, and then it's actually now at Copill Downs, they have them similar to, where you have a hole and you can put a steel grate or a wood grate or something, forcing the unit to use it. But it's a concept that is a frequent, enduring nature of battles. As I did 25 years in U.S. infantry, and in none of my combat experiences, I didn't think about mouse holing to get to the objective. And if I did, the amount of supplies that I would need to be provided by hire would be a lot. But the Israelis, it's indoctrinated in their big D doctrine. That's the way they do it. They don't want to be on the streets or the alleyways. So they drill poking through the walls. But as I am an urban geek, not every wall is the same. There are load-bearing walls. There are electricity in walls. If this was indoctrinated in the way we do things, it would have repercussions on the special equipment, tactics, techniques, and procedures that we would use, like in something called an urban mobility course that we felt like we no longer needed because we're not doing coin anymore. We don't need to enter and clear rooms. So we deleted that course from our inventory. Precision fallacy is a concept. A friend of mine named Amos Fox coined it. I really like it. In Sahara, we'll talk about it, about the constraints on the use of force. We had this idea about precision guided munitions, both in their accuracy and their, how much they're going to help us in urban warfare. But the fallacy is that a reliance on precision, that you won't need the old school big artillery, right? I just need a lot of precision guided munitions. Well, hopefully Ukraine has killed that. But there's also a fallacy, even when we thought that was the case. In the 2017 Battle of Mosul, we implemented precision fallacy, which is, okay, I just need close forces to identify where the enemy is, back up, call in the precision guided munition on that building, right? I validated it. I observed it for a long time. I know that it's enemy in there. Oh, I can't see what's in the basement. That's, never mind. Blow it up. Well, it's all connected on underground, so the enemy just stands there long enough for you to call in fire and then goes to the next building. So the precision fallacy is that I'm going to precisely destroy every building of the city, precisely though, trying to get to the enemy that I never get to. And the one instance that Sahara might mention it, where we, in all our power, there was a sniper on top of a building, right? So the super surface of a building, engaging a unit. So when we have all the precision in the world, within like 4 meters, we took down the building that the sniper was in, but there were 100 civilians in the basement because ISIS had trapped 100. So it became an international incident. Like, why'd you do that? Well, I had proportionality. I had discrimination. I can. But it led to one of the challenges of knowing what's in there. And that's that aspect of information warfare, that strategic compression that is Some people have tried to argue against me has always been there in war, right? The Roman legions attacking said city and the Senate finding out that it didn't go well. That aspect of tactics on the strategic implications has always been there. Bull crap. I knew about the massacres in Bucha before it hit international news. Before the Pentagon knew about it. Just because I happen to listen to spaces that are in country broadcasting live the first people into Bucha and that a genocide had occurred before the military, the international news, because that's the new information domain of urban areas. And there's a space that I'm a really big fan of called the Maria Report on Twitter, which is a new aspect to two, which is just for last over a year, 365 days a day, 24 hours a day, talking about Ukraine with people in Ukraine, with experts on technology, weapons, everything. But it's the future. Next slide. So I can roll into the next brief, right?
You do whatever you want, John. So let's. You're actually like 3 minutes, so let's have a little bit of a discussion,
yeah,
if we could.
So everybody's good on Urban 101. I can test you now, right?
Go ahead, John. One of the things I will say about the CRIMO, CRIMO?
Yeah, CRIMO.
So one thing I will say is that that's one of the disadvantages to being, I'm sorry for the distance learning students, for the virtual students, but that's one of the reasons why we do this here. And one of the reasons that we're the only place that you can do this is because you will see all of that terrain, all 5 aspects of that terrain. You'll see all of that tomorrow from 1,000 feet, right? One of the country's only got 2 megacities. It's here and where? New York City, right? So, and like John says, 2 megacities, very different, very, very different. We do have, but you'll still see, we have a downtown. We have outlying high-rise areas. You'll fly over them, right, down Wilshire Boulevard. So I would say that that's, something that you'll see all of those. You can't just, I'm not going to go into it, but some unit was like, hey, I can't make it to your course. Can you send me the PowerPoint and I'd like to teach it? I'm like, that's not how this works, right? So if it was this easy, we assemble the world's foremost urban warfare experts, you come in and this interaction and the interaction in the socials tonight, where you can pick John Spencer's brain or you can pick Dr. King's brain, that is the real secret sauce of this course, not to mention our visit to the National Training Center. And again, having to be close to that. This is the only place where you have a mega city right next to one of the world's premier training centers. So talk about density, right? John, you usually mention the density of that slum in India.
Yeah, so it's I went and studied the Battle of Mogadishu, the 2008 attacks in Mumbai, where 10 privates took down a megacity of 20 million, which is impressive. But while I was there, I also toured slums, which Stu Lyle talked about, which are, by our definition of CRIMO, is a residential area with shanty towns and everything. But the Davari slum is 1 million residents per square mile. And when I went in there,
can you drive a Bradley through that? Well, you can. But right, but what if you just what kind of, so Howard's not here, let's get face. What are you doing, right? Because one of the things we talked about earlier, you can do anything you want. You have to take consequences. So yes, it's amazing. We actually had in this course last time, we had somebody say, well, this is the point. I can do whatever I want. Right? No, it's not that we've taken off already, and you're kind of giving me the, well, I don't know. Pictures of dead kids on TV. Pictures of dead kids on TV. Whether you're in coin, or you're in large-scale combat operation. And I'll take two things. One, you got a war crime trial waiting for you. And 2, you got to meet your God someday. So yes, through a slum with 1 million people per square kilometer. Yes. What is it going to do when you do that? And there's some places like the favelas down in Brazil where it's not a shanty town. Those are permanent structures. But some of the cops don't even go in there, right? You're just going to get swallowed up and die. It doesn't need to be a shanty town to be that level of it. And to talk about his precision fallacy on the first course, we had a guy who had planned the Battle of Mosul that we keep talking about in 2016 and 2017. And he told me the precision fallacy, right? Which is, if you had told me up front what this place would look like when we were done, because what happened was they were in a ring around it, and they would fall back building by building. Every time we precision dropped one, they would fall back. And the Iraqis, with our help, destroyed that entire city. And the planner had said, if you had told me what the thing would look like at the end, I would have carpet bombed a 500-meter circle around Baghdad to begin with, and I would have killed them all, and I would have saved the interior. But because we did that precision fallacy, we marched into the center of Mosul, laying waste to the place. So
this gets to logistics of war, which is, as a planner for urban operations, will become huge. And why I'm such a fan of Jason's numbers, although again people argue them, is that we want planning assumptions going into an urban battle. Yes, it's going to take more of this, this, and this. In that Battle of Mosul, we fired every Hellfire missile in our strategic inventory to where they were running out of them. We're kind of now getting familiar with, hey, we don't have enough artillery, we don't have enough, all of these things. But this was in the precision guide, that they are an expendable asset. And we expended, trying to use the precision fallacy, every Hellfire missile in our inventory, and they couldn't make more faster. Or the fact that I had a conversation, this gets to what we're trying to teach in this course. Like, if I know all these things, then why wouldn't I plan for more of it for my operation? Well, hopefully you will. Me and Sahar had a comment about white phosphorus. And can you use white phosphorus in urban areas? Of course you can. Should you is another question. But what is white phosphorus other than burning of equipment? It's a great smoke generator. And then again, in the Battle of Mosul, they had a hostage rescue enemy takeout of the hospital in Mosul, the main hospital. And we were just supporting the Iraqi battalion assaulting the hospital, which is contentious already, right? They're assaulting a hospital, but that's where the enemy had put their headquarters. And we wanted to provide them the artillery smoke screen. Well, how much HC artillery smoke do you think we had at the time?
Not much.
Zero. Yeah. So the CENTCOM AOR, there was zero HC artillery smoke for whatever reason that the artillery doesn't like HC smoke. So like, oh, well, we have white phosphorus though. And it's really good. So they fired white phosphorus in downtown Mosul next to the hospital. And oh, well, what do you know? The next morning it's the leading story of international news, firing white phosphorus against the hospital. Like, no.
You know what white phosphorus does in addition to provide smoke?
Burns. And it's just it's like this contentious thing, but you can use it. And I argue with Sahar, like, yeah, I would have made that decision. But why do we not have HC artillery smoke?
It's a question. Why not? Where's my logistician? Where's my SFAB logistician? Why?
So probably because of stock control.
Because you didn't order it.
Exactly.
Is the short answer. Because the G4 didn't order, right? The grenades that you guys use when we think about throwing a smoke grenade, what is that grenade really designed to do? Signaling. What are you trying to use it for? Obscuration. Right? Does everybody know that we have white phosphorus grenades that are designed for obscuration? Right? But we used to have, when I was young, and we had smoke generating platoons. Chemical officers used to do them, right? You could drive and they'd spray oil against a manifold and it would make just tons and tons of smoke. I don't even think we have that stuff.
We used to have a button on our issue fighting vehicle. They had to push the button that dumps diesel onto the manifold. Somebody decided that we no longer needed that. Took it off. So we don't have smoke generation. Actually, if you listen to my podcast about the top 10 things we need, number 10 is smoke.
Obscuration smoke.
Yeah, because even in training, like, how much smoke do you have? Because are you going to really run from that street to that street without any type of concealment, let alone cover? And again, I can show you thousands of videos of Ukraine where that doesn't go very well for the Russians. And then when they figure it out and they start implementing smoke. And
how did the Marines in Way figure out when they did grenades?
What did they do? What did they do? I want to take and run across in the back left.
They'd fire the Ontos and just either the back blast or all the dust that was kicked up, and then they would run. So they used direct fire weapons as obscuration, right? Soldiers having to adapt.
So this is a separate, but tear gas is another example of the evolution of urban warfare. In Hue, they cleared buildings with tear gas very effectively. In the 2017 Battle of Mawari, the Philippines used tear gas effectively to clear buildings so they don't have to destroy them. Can you use tear gas in war?
No.
Actually,
this is a great discussion tomorrow. You're going to get a law of war from Colonel Blanco, who's going to come here.
Yeah.
And I want somebody to ask him the tear gas question.
That's right.
It's a great question, and it's a great debate.
Are
you saving the law of war? If you get them out alive with tear gas, are you saving their life? Yes. So it's humanitarian in some ways to get them out with tear gas. You're not allowed to do it. So your only choice is M67 fragmentation grenade. Here you go. Right? That's what you can throw in instead.
I won't steal Lance's thunder about the legality of it, but I actually did I was a big fan of it. Like, we need to have it, we need to have it. And I had to keep doing research on why we lost tear gases in our militaries, and not something, even though when I was at JRTC, I had it and I could, to play with the opposing forces. But the reason we lost it, if you don't know, is from the tunnels of Vietnam. So our solution to underground warfare was tear gas. So we wouldn't enter, tunnel rats are limited, so we wouldn't enter the tunnels. So we would just pump tear gas into them, literally with a Mito, with a generator, and funnel it in there. Or we dump CS powder and then cover it and neutralize it. But I won't steal the underground warfare aspect of it too. It's how we clear tunnels. There's some legal issues with that. So what's the alternative? And this is about tools that the planner plans for. Like, what do I need? So I've found in very recent history, which is dropping smoke down a tunnel to map it, so to see where it goes, really effective way. Is any smoke that the U.S. military carries breathable?
Not supposed to breathe it.
You can't. It's deadly. And your gas mask will not save you from HC smoke. It's not breathable. So if your soldiers, which I'm going to tell you what militaries did this. If you drop HE smoke down a tunnel, you're basically trying to kill with gas anybody that's down there because it's not breathable. And same thing with when we implement giant smoke generators in the open, that's cool. Like, it's mixing with the open air. So do that in a dense urban area. What's it going to do to breathe it for your own soldiers? So considerations as a planner on what am I ordering for the operation I've been assigned.
Agreed. So you would pick up your handy dandy gray book and you would look on page 93 and it says, staff should order the variant for urban warfare, the AT4CSAST anti-structure tandem order. This can be fired from both inside confined spaces like buildings and bunkers. Something like that, right? So like he said, and like Jason was saying, this is why this course is for planners is, do you need to know the tactics? No, but you need to know what's used there. You need to understand the tactics so that you can set the conditions. And you guys will hear, if you're not already at the division level, we talk about that all the time at the division. We don't fight in the city. We set the conditions for the brigades to fight in the city, right? And you planners set the conditions for success at the tactical level by providing the right materials, by providing task organization, right? So somebody else talk other than me.
Last question about can you drive a Bradley through a slump? So in the 2006 Battle of Jenin, the Israelis were in a refugee camp, which I thought meant tents and everything, but it actually doesn't. It means lots of buildings. And they faced this problem that Jason was talking about with no way to get casualties out, no logistics to be brought up. Does anybody know what a D9 bulldozer is? So the Israelis took a D9 bulldozer and the commander said, I want a street running through the middle of this refugee camp. And they used, which we don't have, an asset to create a logistical line to save their soldiers' lives. Controversial, yes. But could you drive a Bradley through a slum? You created a way. The Bradley can't do it, a D9 bulldozer, because what did we have in the Second Battle of Fallujah when we had 9 months to plan for it? We had D9 bulldozers. Now, they're not in our inventory. I don't know where they got them, but they had D9s in Fallujah because somebody on the planning staff's like, yeah, we probably need a big bulldozer. I got to drive one when I was in Israel last time. They're amazing, giant machines, and they would scare me, any enemy, just by hearing it coming down the street. because that's their form of warfare. When they go into a contested urban area, they know what area they're going into. But this gets to the engineering assets, to mobility and counter mobility. The biggest asset of most battles against ISIS was a bulldozer. In the Battle of Mosul, multiple of the battles. They used commercial bulldozers, because what do you need to break down a well-prepared, in Mosul, a 2-year prepared defense? You need a siege-busting engine. In modern times, that means some type of bulldozer device, armor for fire, mechanized infantry. You need a very specific package. And again, in my grade book would be, under these conditions, an enemy-held city that has had a planned defense, what are the formations, the task organization that I need for that? There's a little bit of that in there, but this goes into my next presentation. Or do I have a question from the audience?
Talking about your precision fallacy, was it when we were there in Iraq, like a lot of the engineering equipment that you're talking about, we're talking about the high marginal locations where they kept a lot of the engineering assets. So it was it like we're talking about, or it was pretty small.
Yeah, there's so many lessons relearned. MICLICs, like how do we clear obstacles? How do we train and clear obstacles in the Army? We use MICLICs. Can you use a MICLIC in the urban area? Yes. 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 The COG that I first met in NTC was the commander of the Battle of Tal Afar, and they needed to do that. Launched a MICLIC, and they all got hung up in telephone wires. So they had to launch one MICLIC to blow all that, and then another MICLIC to blow the next one. The answer is yes, you can. The answer is yes, you can. There's no reason you can't. But did you plan it? Do you know the second and third order effects of what you're going to do? Like Jason was saying with the rubble. Like, yeah, you can bomb the crap out of the city beforehand, but you better know that that's going to mean you need a different formation to move forward to get to where you want to go, because you just created a bunch of obstacles for yourself.
What's a question from the audience?
No, I thought he raised his hand and it was his question.
So thanks so much. Along that list, it seems like we're guilty of optimism bias, shall we say. And do you think that, and by that I mean as in, the precision fallacy of, oh, we've got 20 targets, right? All of them are precision fires, while ignoring the amount of rounds that we actually have for precision fires, etc. Do you think that's willful because of how we plan? We always plan to win, and therefore we don't expect to lose, or is it? Are we just head in the sand and let's ignore the things that are difficult?
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And this is not even not knowing our own history, but not knowing what actually happened. Like even this morning, I've heard some things like, yeah, well, but that's not what. Like the Battle of Aachen, right? It's an American win, right? Jason?
Oh, yeah, very much so.
So what was the strategy that the American military, that eventually there's 2 battalions that moved forward, what was their strategy in that battle? They actually it became so synonymous with their strategy that it is the call sign of the units that fought there. Knock them all down. Their strategy was to destroy every building in the front, not to clear any building. So the strategy of the Battle of Aachen was knock them down. They try. I don't know if, again, understanding all the political constraints in the American way of war and the Western way of war. But the reason I bring it up, one, Aachen, okay, yeah, it was a win. But in academics, we don't say no, we say yes and. Like, yes, that's a great point. And did you know that this happened? So we don't even like to admit our own failures. So it's not just optimism, it's the Western way of like, we win. That's what we do. There's no losses, right? You know, the Mogadishu we didn't lose. But in urban warfare analysis and preparation, it's like, no, 2004 Battle of Sadr City. No, we got a Battle of Suez. Now I got a long list of Russian battles where they got their asses kicked. But on the Ukrainian side, there have been mistakes. On the American side, there's been mistakes that would then change ourselves. this is the question I always get. Like, what is it going to take for the U.S. military to change? When I have all the senior leaders that ever take power, it's like, oh, we need to change. Like, what's it going to take to change? Like, you have to look at the history of the U.S. military changing itself. One of the biggest defeats we've ever had was Operation Iron Claw, which fundamentally changed the way the U.S. military does things. But that was, we all agreed that we had failed. So that's what I think is, and this again, what the data says, people, and I've done some work with the British Army, will collect a bunch of historical case studies that support what they already want to do. Like, Shay, you know, we don't do defend because defense doesn't work. See, in this case, all the defenders lost. Like, okay, that's the route you're going down. Go ahead.
I was just going to say.
Last question, please.
I was just going to say that that's how typically the Army changes. Is if you look at the more successful wars that we've had, it's usually we get our ass handed to us at the beginning. We change and then we win. But the wars where we are successful at the beginning, our assumptions are confirmed, so we don't need to change, and then it's long, proactive wars that are usually the ones that bite us in the backside.
Yeah, I know enough to know that it just makes me dirty feeling about it, talking about it.
I heard a great quote that the only thing that's harder than putting a new idea in the Army is taking an old idea out.